Hey, good day. Welcome to today's Ruby live event. We will be this is part 4 of our cake baking and decorating course, and working with Chef Alyssa Wallers and Jacquy Pfeifer to present the concept of fondant and gum paste. So this is part 4. We started with equipment in the kitchen, how to get prepared. Then we went into sponges, how to make sponges. Then we worked on fillings and frostings and buttercreams. And now we're moving into fondant and gum paste. So key components in building a cake, and this is really out of my wheelhouse as a savory chef, and I've worked with it once, but Alyssa Wallers is the key to this live event today in presenting the concept. So let me have Alyssa and Chef Jacquy introduce yourselves.
I'm Chef Jacquy Pfeifer, the co-owner of the French Pastry School, and this is Chef Alyssa Wallers.
I'm a cake decorator and pastry chef at the French Pastry School. I teach in both the cake program as well as the pastry program.
Excellent. So for those of you who are joining the live event for the first time, we have a queue where you can enter questions, and we will answer the questions in about a half an hour. We're going to go through a few key components, talking about rolled fondant, modified fondant, gum paste, 50-50 paste, how to cover a cake with fondant, and just enter your questions as we go through it, and we'll capture them at the end and make sure we can answer all your questions around fondant and gum paste. So chefs, let's move into the first concept of making rolled fondant and the coloring of that.
Yeah, are you gonna roll the video first, Scott? Or
yeah, let's do the video. Let's do the video, and then we can have discussions around it. So tell us a little about this. Since we didn't have a voiceover on the video, tell us kind of what happened there and the basics of what fondant is.
So fondant is a sugar dough. Its main component when you make it from scratch is powdered sugar and gelatin. So in the video, you'll see them warming up bloom gelatin with shortening over a double boiler, and then you're kneading in powdered sugar to make it a paste. What's wonderful about making fondant from scratch is that it's very cost effective. It's not very expensive to make. And you can also, one of the biggest complaints that I hear people say is that fondant isn't tasty. It doesn't taste good. And it just tastes like sugar, really. But if you make it from scratch, you're able to kind of add in extracts or flavorings of your choice. So that is a great way to kind of make it taste a little bit better. And you can customize it to like whatever your filling or flavor is of your cake.
And also the fondants that you buy on the market, sometimes they contain ingredients that you don't want. And those ingredients are in there so the fondant can last months and sometimes years.
Yeah.
And the one you make from scratch is really something that you make, and you can still keep it for a few weeks, but usually you make it and then you use it right away to cover cakes, like this one, for instance. So you have total control over your recipe, and we use 160 bloom gelatin. But in our course, we actually provide a formula if you want to use a different type of gelatin, stronger or weaker. So this way, you can really make the fondant that you want. Some people like it a little bit more rubbery, elastic. Others like it a little bit more easier to shape and roll out. So as I mentioned, you have total control over the recipe and its use.
Tell me a little bit about storing fondant. Is this something you can make ahead of time and store it in the refrigerator or in the freezer? Or when you're planning to build a cake and you've made your sponge and your fillings and maybe you're getting your buttercream ready, what about the fondant?
So we recommend that the fondant be made at least 6 hours ahead of time, but it can be made days ahead of time as well. So it's not something you have to do day of, which I think is great, especially as you're kind of planning your week. Most cakes are due on the weekend. So making fondant is something you can do on like a Monday or Tuesday. You make sure that you wrap it up really well. So it's always wrapped very tightly twice in plastic wrap and then stored in an airtight container or Ziploc bag. If it's just stored for 1 or 2 days, you can store it at room temperature, or then you can put it in the refrigerator. But you definitely don't want to freeze it. It can kind of take on too much humidity that way. So, and if you do put it in the refrigerator, when you're about to roll it out, you have to let it come to room temperature. It'll be a little bit more pliable and easier to roll out at room temp.
Yeah, and all those pastes and doughs that we're going to talk about today have to really be wrapped in plastic well, because they all are sugar-based, and sugar loves to dry out. And so always wrap them well. I mean, here in Chicago, when it's cold, it's super dry, and it will get crusty in a matter of minutes. So wrap them up really well, and then you can keep them for days, even weeks. But like Chef Alisa said, most cake decorators, they make their fondant on Monday or Tuesday, and then and so they get ready for the week ahead, the weekend ahead.
Excellent. Okay, so we saw a quick video on how to make it. Then the next step will be rolling it and covering a cake. So this next video is about a minute long, but it kind of gives you some of the details of how the fondant actually works, the feel of it. And I'll roll that, and then you can kind of discuss that.
Great.
Let's bring it back.
So that's awesome. I've worked with fondant only a few times in my career, and every time it was not that easy as that video made it look. It looks as though that was the easiest folding. There's no cracks, and it perfectly fit the cake. What's the trick here? Is it pretty elastic, and is it forgiving when you're trying to cover a cake?
So kind of like everything in pastry, it is going to take a little bit of practice. So when we were teaching it to in-person students, we had them practice a few times covering a dummy cake, rolling it out, getting that kind of flow. When you start working, I mean, you do have to work a little bit quickly with the fondant because it can start to form like what they will call like an elephant skin, where it can start to crack as you drape it over. But working quickly, and also it sounds counterproductive, but not having the fondant be too thick, because having the fondant be too thick will also, the weight of it will actually start to pull and tear the cake down. So you just want to make sure that it's rolled out very thin. And the first thing you're going to do is smooth out that top so that there's no air bubbles, and then secure it right along that top edge. And that will prevent any sort of tearing from happening. And then go from there.
And also for the rolling of the fondant, you want to use some kind of a plastic rolling pin. This one is specially made for that, but I'm sure you can find some other substitute, like in a hardware store, maybe a PVC pipe that you could use. But one thing you don't want to use is a wooden rolling pin, because there might be some small pieces of wood that might fall out of the rolling pin, and also the surface. You want to talk about the rolling surface?
We like to roll on either marble or granite, or like a stainless steel top would be the best. Rolling on a wood countertop, wood tends to hold a lot of particles like flour or crumbs, so it's sometimes hard to get clean. It sometimes also has it's not completely smooth, which is the same with like the wooden rolling pin. It might not be completely smooth, so fondant is pretty delicate, and you can actually start to see any sort of graining from your rolling pin on it as well. So yes, smooth surface, stainless steel, marble, granite.
But you cannot take marble for granted, right? So, but also, there's some cheaper options, right? If you have Formica on your work surface, that is also workable, because it will not release any fiber or anything, right?
Right.
Okay, so when you say it's better to be a little thinner, are we talking about 1/8 of an inch, quarter inch? I mean, not quarter inch, but like 1/16 of an inch?
Yeah, eighth of an inch.
A quarter would be too thick, Scott.
Yep.
For covering, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't mean a quarter. Is 1/8 or a 1/16? And then in terms
You
of the
said
bubbles,
a quarter. You said a quarter.
I think 1/8 of an inch is a good number to go for.
and then in terms of bubbles, why are the bubbles there? I saw the video popping the bubbles with a little pin. Where do those come from?
So the bubbles just come from the kneading. It's just you kneading is kind of incorporating air bubbles into the fondant. So they're just naturally there. Sometimes you'll accumulate more air bubbles if you are coloring your fondant. So if I have to do a big batch of fondant, I like to color it maybe a couple hours ahead of time, just so that kind of gives those air bubbles a chance to kind of dissipate. But that popping of it is really important. As you're rolling it, you'll kind of start to see them form. Once you cover the cake, just kind of like in baking, the air pockets can expand once they're in the refrigerator. So you definitely want to get rid of those before you put it on the cake, if possible.
So just pop them with a needle, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, and it smooths out with your rolling pin or with a fondant smoother.
Absolutely.
And kind of another question is, once you've covered the cake with the fondant and you've done some decorations, how soon should you serve it? Is it going to start to dry out?
So normally fondant covered cakes can go in the refrigerator. So you don't have to worry. I mean, usually there's some sort of filling that needs to be refrigerated. So if it is a cake that can sit out at room temperature, sitting out for a couple hours is fine. Even, I guess, if it's a cooler space and you have more of a ganache or a stable filling, leaving it out in a cool place overnight is also fine.
And what about freezing a cake that is covered with fondant?
Freezing can be a little bit tricky because of the added moisture that you get from putting it in the refrigerator and then pulling it out. So you just want to make sure that it's wrapped really well. And then when you take it out, you're moving it directly from the freezer to the refrigerator and letting it sit in the refrigerator before moving it from the refrigerator to room temperature.
It's one thing you don't want to do, Chef Scott, is to pull out a cake that was frozen and pull it out straight in at room temperature, because the difference of temperature is so much that it will naturally create condensation, and it will just be like oozing water. Okay, so transfer it from the freezer to the refrigerator for a few hours. It depends also on the size of the cake, and then after that, from the refrigerator to room temperature. So this way, it's in stages.
So another question, because it's all new to me too. And when you're rolling out the fondant, and if it starts to stick, are you using powdered sugar in place of cornstarch or something to actually roll it out with powdered sugar?
Some people like to roll it out with powdered sugar. We like to roll it out with cornstarch. And there's two things that can happen. You can roll it out with powdered sugar, and that's fine. Sometimes people have hot hands. I have hot hands when I'm rolling it. So hot hands and powdered sugar, as you're moving around fondant, can actually start to create a very sticky syrup type mess that you have going on. So that's why we recommend cornstarch, because it actually kind of it allows you to move the fondant freely, and it also doesn't kind of make a syrup on your hands. It sounds kind of a little bit gross, but if it's sticking, there's two problems. One, you probably don't have enough cornstarch on the table. It shouldn't really stick to your rolling pin. If it's sticking to your rolling pin, you're just having too much pressure. So if you're using a fondant rolling pin or plastic rolling pin, we never really put the cornstarch on the top. It shouldn't stick at all. So if it is sticking, it's probably because you're using too much pressure.
Yeah. And never ever use flour, because every once in a while I get this question. Do not use flour. We're not rolling out pie dough or something, okay? And
Right.
For the people who have a dough roller or dough sheeter, don't ever use this, because the fondant is going to pick up every impurity in that machine, and everything we tell you today is always based on experience and things that happen to us. So just don't try it at home.
This happened to you.
To you.
Melissa, Chef, you're perfect. It's never happened to you. So now I can think back when I was rolling with fondant and I was using powdered sugar, and I have hot hands. So I basically got that mess, and I was like, I cannot do this.
Yeah.
So I got
Also
frustrated.
because you roll it to a 1/4 inch stick.
I mean, it's kind of a disaster waiting to happen, because then you have like a syrup, and then you have fondant, and then it's just making it even more sticky. So cornstarch is the way to go.
And also, if you work in a dry environment, like, again, it's very dry right now here in Chicago. You once you bring the fondant out and you have your cake ready, you need to get going and then roll it out, wrap it, and then be done. Because if you wait too long, then you have the elephant skin effect. Unless you want to make an elephant theme cake,
Right.
then you're right on the money, Chef Scott.
Thank you, Chef. All right, so let's move into the next topic. We're going to move into gum paste and the fundamentals of gum paste and making simple decorations with it. So real quick before we go into this video, what is the difference between fondant and gum paste?
So gum paste and fondant are both sugar doughs, but instead of where fondant, our recipe of fondant, is powdered sugar and gelatin. Gum paste is always powdered sugar and tylose powder or gum tragacanth. And that gum is what allows gum paste to get rolled out and be very flexible, so it can get rolled out very thinly. And then it also dries super fast, which allows us to make really delicate cake decorations like gum paste flowers.
Yeah, and those flowers, Chef Scott, those flowers, I don't know how old they are, but
They're years old.
they could be.
Yeah.
I don't know. We have a box. We bring them out for teaching or whatnot, and they are at least, I want to say, 10 years old, right? No,
Maybe not 10, but
why don't you
like
go along with the story?
5.
5 to 10 years old. But the big difference also between gum paste and fondant is fondant. You need it to be a little bit more elastic when you roll it out, and then you want to wrap it on the cake. So So gelatin does that job, and a gum paste is made with gum, tragacanth, or tylose, and it gels, but it does not. It's not that elastic compared to gelatin. So that's where the difference is also.
Great. Thanks for explaining that. So let's roll into the fundamentals of gum paste. It's about 45 seconds long, and then we can talk about how to use it, how to make those beautiful flowers that you made 10 years ago, Chef. So go ahead and roll it, Patrick.
Yes, I made them just before the.
All right. So tell us about making gum paste and how to make flowers. I know that this course that we've developed, which is 20 units long, approximately 60 hours of content, we get to the gum paste section, and these tend to be the longest units because we go through detail on how to make a variety of things. So I've never done this before. So Chef Alyssa, give us some pointers.
Well, let's first talk about making gum paste from scratch. You can buy commercial gum paste, and it exists out there, but we teach making it from scratch because it's kind of like the fondant where it's super cost effective. It's not very expensive to make, but the pre-made gum paste can be. It's very easy to store. So gum paste can be stored in the freezer. So unlike fondant, you can freeze it. And once it's in the freezer, it can be stored 3 to 4 months. And then you just kind of have to put it in the refrigerator, and then you can bring it to room temperature to use it. And you're able to customize it especially if you're making a lot of flowers or a lot of decorations. Sometimes you want to add more tylose because you want it to dry quickly. Maybe you need a little bit more time, so you use a little bit less. So if you are a serious cake decorator doing a lot of gum paste work, it really gives you the chance to kind of customize the gum paste for yourself. Once the gum paste is made, it has to be stored just like fondant. It has to be double wrapped in plastic and then into an airtight container. One thing is when you're using gum paste, as you're working with it, you always have to keep it covered. So whatever gum paste you're not using should have a container over it. When you're rolling it, you have like that little plastic flap to cover it or some sort of page protector because gum paste dries out so much faster than fondant. So you want to just make sure you're always keeping it covered.
And this is another thing you can do in your off time as a cake decorator, Monday, Tuesday, or so, and weeks in advance. I know a lot of cake decorators. When it's the slow season in the winter, they just make a bunch of orchids and roses, and they don't color them. They just keep them white. And when the customer comes and says, I want blue orchids or red orchids or yellow orchids, then they just airbrush them or dust them with powder. So that's it's very convenient to make your own, and you can make it way in advance. And actually, if you store them in airtight boxes, even during the most humid summers, they are not going to fade or change or soften up.
So that point you said about coloring and tinting. So you would make the base gum paste first, store it, and then go in and work it down the line and add coloring. And what kind of coloring do you add to this so this actually works?
So we use a gel-based color, and that works fine. It actually works really well. You have two options. So if you know that you have a cake that has a ton of red roses and you're making your gum paste, you want to just put the food coloring right into the gum paste as you're making it. It shows it in the video. So you can go ahead and already, it's a lot neater because you're having the mixer do the work for you than kneading it in. But you also have the flexibility. Once that gum paste is made, you just make a big batch of white, and then maybe you store it for later use. And as orders come in, maybe you need pink roses, and then maybe you need blue hydrangeas. You can just kind of cut off a piece of your gum paste and just knead in the gel color as you need it. So it's pretty versatile in that regards.
Excellent. So let's move into the next video, which is modified fondant, and going into this and making some simple decorations out of modified fondant.
Yep.
All right, Patrick. So tell us, Chef Alyssa, what is that we added to that purple, and what is modified gum or modified fondant compared to gum paste?
So modified fondant is a way to kind of get some of the properties of gum paste into fondant. So what we're kneading into this purple piece of fondant is tylose powder and some shortening. So the tylose powder is there. It's going to give a little bit more strength to the fondant. It's also going to give quicker drying time to the fondant. The shortening is there just to kind of soften it up a little bit because that tylose likes to suck in a lot of moisture. So that shortening is just there to kind of condition your modified fondant. And modified fondant doesn't replace gum paste. Modified fondant is used for different applications where you need a little bit longer working time than maybe you have with gum paste, such as a bow on a cake where you roll it out, you need time to shape it, you actually need time to maybe put it on the cake and kind of move it around on the cake without it cracking or drying. Or a lot of times if you're just doing like a long stretch of ribbon, if you just use normal fondant, it actually will start to pool. It'll get too heavy. So you need a little bit quicker drying time. So then in that regards, you use modified fondant.
And we brought a cake here that was made by Chef Courtney Clark, one of our instructors, and all the small items right here, even a little doggy, they can be made with modified fondant. Okay, so it's a great way to just use something you already have. If you already have fondant, you just add the tylose and the shortening, and then you can make those items again way in advance, because a cake like this is pretty elaborate and would take quite some time to make. So you can make all those pieces ahead of time and store them away. Okay, that's where modified fondant comes in.
Excellent. So let's move on to the next video, which is 50-50 gum paste. So tell us a little bit about this before we take a look.
So 50-50 gum paste is actually 50% gum paste and 50% fondant. So it's just kind of getting kind of the best of both worlds, where you're taking a little bit more longer working time with the fondant, adding it to the gum paste, and the gum paste is bringing in a little bit faster drying time. 50-50 gum paste and modified fondant can for the most part be used interchangeably.
Let's throw that 50-50, Patrick.
Grilled cheese.
Oh, I can't.
All right, so how would I use the 50-50 compared to the modified fondant again?
almost interchangeably. So it kind of just depends on what you have available to you. Some cake decorators may do a lot of gum paste, and they always have gum paste available. So it's a lot easier to knead in the gum paste and fondant to make the 50-50 paste. That is ready to use right away. Where modified fondant, you actually have to allow like 15-20 minutes to let the tylose do its work into the fondant. So it kind of just depends on what you have. Some cake decorators may not do gum paste flowers. Maybe they're more doing like figures or more of like a sculpted cakes. And so they mostly use fondant. That might be easier for them to just make modified fondant instead of going the route of making gum paste just to make the 50-50.
Yeah. So all those items that we just showed you, they can be made also with 50-50 gum paste. Is interchangeable. So like Chef Alisa said, you just might have a gum paste always on hand and fondant always on hand. So it might just be more practical to just use 50-50 of each, and then just mix it, and then you're ready to go. The modified fondant, you gotta wait for the gum to do its action to start to gel. So it's either or, but both of them can be used for those type of decorations.
What I will say, which is nice about the modified fondant, is that if you're doing something, maybe you're doing like a purple cake, and you need the border to match, you need a bow to match your purple cake font. So you have your purple fondant, and you're like, I need a topper that's the same purple. Now, if you tried to make 50-50, it might not match. The gum paste isn't exactly white. Sometimes it's a little bit of an off-white. So in that regards, modified fondant is great because you can just take that same color of fondant, you just add the tylose and shortening, and you have an exact match of color match for your cake. So that's where modified fondant can be very convenient if you need to do an exact color match.
Awesome. So all of this, the details of the recipes and how this comes together are all covered in the course. And if you look on the homepage of this live event under Chef Alisa's name and Chef Jacky's name, we have a link to the course. It gives you a little bit about the rest of the course in terms of the frostings and, of course, the sponge cake and the buttercreams and the fillings we've already talked about. So let's show this last video on fondant, which gives you a little bit more detail of the decorations that can be made.
Okay.
So that's nice. It seems like a lot of finesse and experience brings you to the point that you can work with fondant and gum paste and 50-50 gum paste and modified fondant. Completely out of my wheelhouse, but Chef Alisa, thanks for taking the lead on this event.
But Chef Scott, you said I have never done those or just a couple times. It's a completely different vibe to make those kind of things, as opposed to if somebody took the pastry course, they used to making a recipe, mixing a butter, and then baking it or whatnot. This is a little different. You have to really slow down and pay attention to details, and there's not that rush of baking things and the timer and this and that. It's all about slowing down and then really paying attention to colors and then the details of the petals. So it's completely different, but it's still a great fine motor skills that we're looking for. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, so the course, caps with a sculpted cake that makes use of all these techniques that you've learned. And there's a whole unit toward talking about the preparation in terms of you're going to do this. So like you said, it is mindful and slower because you have all these components that you're going to put together to make this masterpiece. So let's jump into the questions and move forward with the first question we have here is from Helena. It's shortening or piping gel. Is one better to use when applying fondant to a cake dummy? And how long should the fondant be allowed to dry before you can safely use the dummy?
So I am on either one. So the short answer is shortening or piping gel can be used on a dummy to cover when you're covering a cake in fondant. I prefer to use shortening because if I make a mistake, which can happen, which happens, and I have a tear or have an air bubble or just didn't smooth out the way I want it, I can easily remove it from the dummy and then knead that back in. Shortening is something that we will sometimes knead into fondant anyway, just to kind of soften it, condition it. Now, if you have your dummy covered in piping gel, and you make a mistake, you have to pull it out. Like you have to try and get that piping gel off the fondant because you don't want to knead all of that piping gel back in. So that is my opinion. I think shortening is also a little bit cheaper than piping gel, especially if you're doing a dummy. The second part of that question, how long? It should dry maybe overnight. It depends on where you're at. So if it's like winter in Chicago, overnight is probably fine before you start applying stuff. You definitely don't want to, if you're going to be moving it around, you want to be able to make sure your fingerprints aren't going to make any indentations. If it's summer in Chicago, it might need a few more days or need to be close to a dehumidifier to kind of pull out that moisture so that you can touch it without making any finger impressions.
And you were talking about dummy cakes, dummy cakes are sometimes useful for weddings because the bride and groom want the cake to be sitting outside on the beach in the sun for hours, and then it would be a very bad idea to eat that cake. So you make a dummy cake with styrofoam dummies that you cover with fondant, and then you have actual fresh cake waiting in the restaurant or the venue where you have the wedding. So that's where dummy cakes are very useful because you're not gonna poison somebody with like spoiled cake.
Right. Yeah.
Thanks, Chef. Okay, so moving to the next question. I think you've already said something about this, but Haifa has a question. How can you make fondant and gum paste tasty?
Well, I think we talked about it a little bit with fondant is you can add different flavors. So you can add rose water, orange blossom water, different extracts, lemon or citrus extracts. And that is a great way to get more flavor into your fondant so it just doesn't taste like sugar. One thing to remember is you shouldn't be doing really thick layers of fondant. Like it should never be like an equal layer of fondant to equal layer of cake. So you want to make sure that it's a really thin application. And usually when those pieces get cut, it can easily get pulled away if somebody doesn't like to eat it. As far as gum paste, to be honest, gum paste isn't used very often to eat. So gum paste flowers, which are like super fragile, they're more of something that we will tell brides, like, once your wedding cake goes into the back, we can remove it and you can take this home. I think I made a gum paste arrangement for my mom that's like it's sitting in her like cabinet in a glass cabinet at home. Like this is something that like is usually like saved for a bride and isn't being eaten. That's not to say people haven't eaten gum paste flowers, but it's not something that they do very often.
Yeah, and the flavoring should always be, like Chef Alisa said, some essence, a few drops of essence or oils, but it's never anything else. Okay, we're not making something that people are gonna eat.
Right. Yeah, it's not like you're gonna have a big piece of it.
Yeah. So just a few drops of lemon oil or peppermint oil or God knows what, that's fine, but that's about it,
Yeah, I think my kids would want to eat that little dog decoration. I'd have to tell them. Nope, that's just for decoration.
I mean, my kids love to eat fondant, which I think is so gross, but
that's disgusting.
It is. What are you gonna do? But in the regards of like the little dog, I do a lot of cakes with fondant figures on top. They get eaten by kids, but they're made with 50/50 or a modified fondant. So it tastes more like fondant than it does like gum paste.
Excellent. Well, that leads us into our next question. We are live streaming on YouTube right now too, so we have questions coming in from that side. This is, can you explain why 50/50 paste has that name?
So, well, 50/50 paste is 50/50 because it's 50% gum paste and 50% fondant. And that's to say, like, the more in depth you can get into cake decorating, sometimes chefs, cake decorators will use 70/30 paste. So it's 70% fondant and 30% gum paste, or the reverse, 30/70. So you can play around with the ratios depending on how quick you are. So sometimes if you're just learning, maybe you need a little bit longer working time. So you need to have more fondant than gum paste. So it's not a hard, fast rule of like it has to be exactly 50/50. You can tailor it to your experience.
Next question is from Janelle. She's taking our course right now, the cake decorating course. Hi, chefs. I'm enjoying the cake baking and decorating course thus far. I was wondering what vegetable shortening you would recommend for the fondant. She avoids coconut due to allergies. So any other suggestions?
I don't have a certain brand that I use.
Any vegetable shortening will work.
I mean, I guess just check the ingredient base to make sure that it doesn't have coconut oil. Most of the time, it's usually just a palm oil,
Yes.
like a hydrogenated
But
palm
anyone,
oil.
any of them will work.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question. Hello, chefs. Once I place the fondant on the cake, it tends to be too heavy to the point where it pushes the cake down and the fondant becomes kind of bloated. Is it that the cake is not appropriate for the fondant? This is from Sandra.
So two things. One is your cake can be too soft. So you want to make sure that it's refrigerated and that you're covering the cake and fondant when it's refrigerated or when it's cold. The longer you work with it, and this has happened to many students when we teach covering cake and fondant, the longer you start trying to manipulate that fondant and smooth it out, the softer your buttercream or ganache, whatever's coating your cake is going to get, and then your cake can start to misshape. So your best bet is to try and get it on, get it smoothed out, and then leave it alone because you can soften it the more you work with it. Lighter cakes such as like a genoise, you might have to just be conscious of that. You're definitely not covering like an angel food cake in fondant, but usually a genoise should be fine as long as it's coated in buttercream and as long as it's chilled. Another thing is you might just be rolling out your fondant too thick.
Yes, and also like you say, you have to work kind of fast because if you work too slow, the cake, everything is gonna soften the cake, the buttercream and whatnot. But like Chef Alisa said, the sponges that you use for cakes, for celebration cakes, they have to be a little bit sturdy so they can handle the pressure of the fondant. Okay. Excellent.
So the course itself, we have a troubleshooting document that we link to for every recipe. So a lot of these things that we're talking about are covered, but I do think it would make sense to kind of do a timing document because you keep talking about the timing of this and what you're going to do if you're going to be building a cake in a week. So yeah, let's think about that. So the next question comes from Sajel, and it's a trick question, chefs. How can you make the fondant vegan, i.e. gelatin-free?
Use a vegan gelatin, right? Have you tried it?
I have not tried.
But I'm sure it works. You just have to make sure you get a vegan gelatin that is strong enough. But I don't see why it would not work. I'm looking at a recipe. There's nothing else that is not vegan, so that should do it. It should work.
So we have another question coming from YouTube. Can a fondant be made with chocolate and have chocolate coloring?
So yes, it's going to be a slightly different recipe, but you can substitute cocoa powder, not melted chocolate, but cocoa powder can be used
Right.
To have that flavoring of chocolate.
So you would
Maybe you
substitute
take out like 5% of the powdered sugar and add cocoa powder, but make sure that it's sifted cocoa powder.
Yeah. So 5% is a good start, and then after that you go up or down depending on how dark you want it. But it's a good start, and like Chef Alisa said, I don't know what you said. Sifted. But also, you gotta make sure that the cocoa powder you add is pure cocoa powder, because sometimes you buy cocoa powder, you open the container and it's kind of like gray, and those are cocoa powder that are mixed with fillers. Those fillers can be actual powdered sugar or cornstarch or a mix of them, and it's not really dark and like it should be. And you add 5% of this. I mean, you substitute 5% of confectioner sugar for this, and it kind of looks like not very dark. So make sure you use a dark, natural, like a cocoa powder that is not mixed with any other ingredients.
Quality is key. All right, here's a question from a quality. Yes, chef, all about it. Here's a question from Judith. Can you use a stainless steel rolling pin?
Yeah.
I would say yes.
You can. Just want to make sure that you wipe it with a cloth before, so that if it got scrubbed at all, you just don't get any of that silver kind of sometimes silver.
And also some stainless steel tables that are not of very high quality, they release a gray residue. So that's
that residue is the word I was.
And so you got to be very careful, because we mentioned before that we can roll the fondant on stainless steel table. It's got to be high quality stainless steel. Otherwise, your fondant will be gray.
White,
But if you make the elephant cake, then it's perfect. You already have the color. So yes, you can use the rolling pin, the stainless steel rolling pin. Make sure you wipe it before you use it, and it should be just fine.
A couple more questions here. Here's a question from Patricia for you, Chef Alisa. She's asking, is she saying gel color, Jell? No, you're actually saying gel, Gel, right?
Gel.
I think in reference to maybe piping gel or gel-based color.
Right. No, it's like a emulsified gel color. Like if you see the little containers of you can buy it like Michael's in the little pots, Americolor or Chef Rubber. They sell both, so you just have to make sure they'll say gel color on there. So it's not a water-based color.
Okay, and we also within the course, Patricia, have a list of all the ingredients, and for most of them, links as to where to buy them.
Yep.
Last question is from Janelle, and Janelle, I think we just answered this in terms of, can I suggest some good fondant flavorings to use when covering a chocolate cake? Could I use it with cocoa powder? So yeah, the 5% high quality sifted cocoa powder in place of some of the powdered sugar would be perfect. Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our questions. I think we covered fondant, gum paste, 50-50, using fondant, when to use it, modified fondant pretty well today. I definitely learned a lot, Chef, so thank you for your input and time. And I look forward to the next live event next month, March 16th.
Excellent.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.